Hello and welcome to Save Your Sanity podcast bonus live stream. You may have heard my guest today, Jonathon Aslay, on my Emotional Savvy program, and I wanted him to come back and talk to us on Save Your Sanity so that we could talk about dating in midlife, dating after divorce, get a few inside things about the dating world, and in particular, Jonathon focuses on giving women the inside scoop on what men are after. So, welcome to the show, Jonathon.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. I want to save my sanity.
Yes, don't we all? So, it's a good thing that we can have
Yeah.
a tip or two in order to do that. So, I know that we've talked extensively before, and everybody just go to emotionalsavvy.com and you can still access all of the podcast episodes there, and you'll find Jonathon's there. But also, I want to add to it now. So many times when you've been in a toxic relationship and you finally get out, you're feeling pretty wounded. You're feeling unsure. You may be lacking in confidence. You may have the question, are there any safe people out there? And today I want to particularly ask you for your expertise for women who are feeling that way. And because they're going to have concerns. Can I trust? Should I trust? And all kinds of things like that. What's your experience with people getting out of toxic relationships?
Oh, well, first out, my heart goes out to anyone who's experienced a relationship that has caused them any pain. And certainly, if I could, I'd just reach over and give them a big, gigantic Jonathan Bear hug if I have their consent. Because I think it's important that we wrap ourselves in a blanket of love when we've experienced emotional trauma, when we've experienced emotional distress. So, the first thing I look at from that perspective is beginning a regimen of self-love, beginning a self-love practice. And right off the bat, the word self-love is probably going to throw some people off because, self-love can mean a lot of things to different people. When I talk about self-love, I'm thinking about our self-worth, our self-confidence, our self-esteem. And by giving an injection of love into those self that we just talked about, it prepares us for going back out there, if you will, in the dating realm. So that would be one of the first things I'd recommend is to begin a personal development, self-help, and spiritual practice, which could include therapy with a therapist. I mean, there's a variety of different things people can do to prepare for their next incarnation of love.
Yes, and I just want to touch on something that you said there about self-love, because when we did our podcast, I said if everybody could see me, I was rolling my eyes at that moment. And the reason for that is not that I don't think self-love is wonderful, but the reason that I was rolling my eyes is because it's become to so many people white noise. They
Yeah.
just don't hear it anymore. But I asked you your definition, and you have a wonderful one. So would you share that?
Well, yes. And the way I look at self love is that it's taking care of that little kid inside of us who feels scared, who feels wounded. And self love is nurturing that little kid inside of us. Self love isn't self care. I mean, isn't about going and getting manicures and pedicures, which some people would say. It's more about taking care of that emotionally hurt or wounded person inside of us and giving giving that little kid inside of us an injection of love. So that's why I said words, some other words that might resonate with people might be self-worth, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-reliance. That's all encompassing when I say self-love.
Mm-hmm. So when we've been hurt, and maybe we've been hurt over a long period of time in a toxic relationship,
Yeah.
or maybe we had a toxic parent who never was capable of loving us or validating us. And so we go out into the world of dating and we're unsure. So,
Yeah.
what do you think the biggest fears that you hear about midlife dating are?
Oh, well, how long do we have for the show? And what I mean by why I was saying that a little tongue in cheek, there's a variety of different fears. One, will I find love again? One could be, will anyone like me? Will I like anyone? Will I be attracted to anyone? Are just a few things people are concerned about. Without being cavalier, I want to say something to everybody. And if you've had a past hurt, as I said before, I give you a big, gigantic hug of love. And I also invite you to remember that the past is prologue. You can actually write a new future for yourself. So if by carrying carrying a story that isn't a very pleasant story, it's going to actually manifest in new relationships. If that's the software playing in your programming, if you will, I've been hurt, I've had a toxic relationship I can't trust, well, then it's going to be very difficult to move forward to attract someone in. If you're expecting someone else to change, that it has to change from within. At least that paradigm has to change within. Otherwise, you'll most likely repeat a pattern.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. And of course, the journey begins within, no matter which way. If you're in a toxic relationship and you recognize it, then the journey begins within in order to say, no, this is not all right with me. No, my boundaries are being trampled continuously. No, I'm being demeaned or dismissed or devalued, or I'm being used. And that journey begins within. So, really, what you're saying is that once you get out of a toxic relationship, this journey needs to continue when you're away from this scenario to say, I can breathe now. I
Yeah.
actually have space to think about myself. Many times I'm asked, Jonathan, well, I got out of the toxic relationship. When should I start dating? And I watch people's faces fall when I say, one journey around the sun. What do you mean? I got to wait a year? you know? Well, yes, I know you haven't been having love and you haven't been feeling wanted, and there's so many things that you'd like to have happen from the outside in right now. But there's such a healing journey to take yourself on to actually feel safe with yourself, not looking for
Yeah.
someone else to make you feel safe.
Yeah. It's interesting. And I want to differentiate because a toxic relationship is one form of relationship. Not all relationships are toxic that end. Certainly, we might characterize them that way, but I'll never forget after I went through my divorce and I started online dating. And I'd written a woman and she said, how long have you been divorced? And I go, well, technically, I'm not divorced. I'm separated. We've been separated for 5 months. And she wrote me back in the email, says, well, reach out to me in 18 to 24 months after your divorce and after you've had one or two transition relationships. And I wrote her back and I said, no, I'm ready for a relationship. And she goes, no, you're not. I mean, she was that definitive. The most interesting thing was, sure enough, I met someone a few months later, had a short-lived relationship, met another person, had a short-lived relationship. And then about 2 years later, I saw that same woman online and I wrote her and I said, oh my God, you were so right. Because when someone is unraveling the tapestry of an old life, whether it's like a marriage, which can be very, intertwined with one another, or even as we were talking about a toxic relationship, it takes time to unravel the tapestry and reintegrate back into one's own sovereignty. So one time around the sun, those 4 seasons is actually some really great advice. In other words, take time to work on oneself, take time to actually learn to appreciate your own company. Because what's so fascinating, and some people don't get this chance, especially people that are raising children. If you're actually get an opportunity to spend 1 year in your own company, and you recognize you are actually self-reliant, that you don't need someone else for your happiness, you approach dating and relationships in a much more confident, more self-reliant, self-confident way by having that
Yes.
1 year around the sun.
Well, absolutely. And you're not looking for someone to fill the void or someone to pick up a piece of yourself. You need to grow into that mature human being who's happy with your own company. Because if we don't ever get happy with our own company, we're not going to be good company. And
No.
that's very important for us all to recognize. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So when people are asking you questions, they come to you and they say, "All right, America's midlife dating coach, um, what are their most frequent questions?"
Well, typically because I'm help women understand men, it's usually centered around understanding why men pull away, how to get men to commit, how to communicate more effectively with men, why do men say one thing and do another. There's women happen to be interestingly fascinated with why. Women are like, why? And so I share perspective to help them get an understanding of that why, because when you can understand something, you can predict future behavior. And when you can predict behavior, you can make better choices. So there's a benefit in understanding the why. Men operate a little bit differently. Men operate by asking, how do I meet a girl? How do I meet a girl? How do I meet a girl? How can I talk to a girl? They don't care about the other stuff. They don't care about the why women do this or why women do that. They just want to know, how can I talk to a girl and how can I meet a girl or woman? Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to change it to woman because I hope they're not looking for girls.
Well, it's just, I think, men kind of operate in that way. We think of it slightly, probably younger in that sense, but most men
Yeah,
kind of
well,
operate
there's a
that
little topic of conversation right there,
way.
Jonathan. Let's do a little segue over there.
Yeah.
What is this thing, from your point of view, about men always dating younger women, much younger women? What's the deal? Because I get a
Yeah.
lot of people who are divorcing in midlife, and then they go out and they find that the men their age are dating down.
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons why this happens. And both, what's interesting is age discrimination actually happens on both sexes. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But men in particular, um, here's the thing. Are they actually dating younger women or do they desire younger women? Because there's a big difference. A lot of men in midlife, and I'm talking about the 50-year-olds, 55-year-olds, 60-year-old men, they might desire younger women, but that doesn't mean that they get them. So there's that piece. Here's one of the primary reasons that this happens is that there's a belief that women who have less experience come with less baggage. People that have less experience in life come to the table with less baggage. So one of the attractions for seeking someone younger is they don't come with maybe the same emotional baggage, maybe the emotional hurts and wounds and things like that. Now, most men don't necessarily think about this from a cognitive perspective, but certainly on a subconscious level. And I know this because I've interviewed hundreds of men. And while on a physical level, they might want to choose a younger person, but it's actually more from an emotional level because there's this fear that someone who's had more experience comes to the table with more baggage. I'm not saying it's a true fear. I'm just saying it is a fear. Or valid fear is what I mean to say. Not a true fear, but it may not be a valid fear, but it's still a fear.
Yeah, well, I think it's very important um, to be able to answer this question because I
Yeah.
was out dancing the other evening and there were people of all ages there. It was the first time I'd been to that particular group. I went with a woman friend, and once the lesson was over and we got to the party part, I sat down, like I have gray hair.
Yeah.
I sat down and I watched all the men with gray hair gravitate to the women who were in their 20s.
Hmm.
And so, how long does it take a man to realize that a woman their own age is a good potential partner?
Well, I think each man is unique. So not everybody, adopts that, but certainly a large propensity of men do that. I want to answer that in a question, but I do want to make it one statement. Women also age discriminate as well. What I've noticed that even women in their 50s and 60s actually don't want to date men their own age. There is this belief that you can't keep
Hmm.
up with the man who's older than me, can't keep up with me. So age discrimination happens on both sides. Men tend to gravitate to a way younger demographic, whereas women might just gravitate 10 years down. But I will say age discrimination happens on both sides. Now, when will a man change? When he feels sparked by someone, quite frankly. I was in a relationship with someone who was significantly older than me. Age wasn't the deciding factor of us being in relationship. What it was how I felt being with this person. So now here's the tricky part. We got to know each other on a social level before we ever got to date. Okay.
Right.
When we get
What
a
was the, let me just ask a question
sure.
because I know that there are people listening who want to know the answer. Were you in a class? Were you in an organization? How did that happen?
Yeah. So, well, it happened twofold. First, we had become Facebook friends because she's also in the profession of personal development. We had a number of mutual friends, and we connected on Facebook. And we talked about collaborating on something. At that time, it wasn't a romantic connection; it was just simply a social kind of professional connection. Then, about a month or two later, I actually saw her on a dating site. I go, wait a minute, that's so and so from a dating site, and this is someone I'm attracted to. Why don't I? And I had her phone number, so I reached out to her, said, "Hey, I see you're on a dating site. I'd like to take you out." And she said no. She said no because she knew she was older than me. She didn't want to date someone, much younger than her. And I said, well, give me a chance. And so we just met up as friends. I called it a friendship date. That was enough to convince her to meet me. And then we were attached to the hip for the next 3 or 4 years.
That's great. But I think it's important to give people an indication of how that happened to work.
Yeah.
Because you can have that thing where people get into the friend zone and you can't get out of it when there
Yeah.
is that age thing that's going on. And I know that the people would have that. So I want to talk about the second part of our topic today, which is
Yeah.
how do you improve your picker? How
Yeah.
do you how do you improve what you're looking for? What kind of process can a person go through to kind of hone down who is the person most likely to whom I'm going to be attracted?
Yeah, I love this question, and it's one of the hardest ones to answer because it starts with something called know thyself. And what I've observed as a dating and relationship is most people actually don't know who's really a good fit for who they are. And their picker is broken because they don't understand the fundamentals of a successful relationship. So I'm going to break it down for your audience really quickly. Most people operate under the premise that if we have chemistry with one another, everything is going to work out like the angels. Because we have chemistry. Well, chemistry is the first leg of the 4 pillars to a successful relationship. And the other 3 pillars include shared values. In other words, do we share the same values? Because if 2 people don't share close, some core values together, then there's going to be a lot of turmoil in the relationship. And so to give you an example, and I'm just going to use this as a broad example, if someone loves the politics of the extreme right, conservative, and the other person loves the politics of the extreme left, chances are these are 2 people that don't share the same values. Okay. I'm not saying they can't, but I'm saying most likely there's going to be a lot of friction. So understanding that values are a critical component. That's number 1. Number 2, do you have blendable lifestyles? Do you have blendable lifestyles? Sadly, a lot of people's lifestyles aren't blendable. But there's this belief if we love each other, this will all work out. Well, love doesn't fix, dynamics in lifestyle. So it's understanding what your lifestyle is and seeking someone who has a compatible lifestyle. So, for example, someone is raising children and the other person is an empty nester and they don't want to raise children. I'm using this as an example. That might be an incompatible lifestyle for them, as one example. Distance oftentimes creates a lot of friction in creating a successful relationship, especially if sometimes people think they're willing to move, but what I've observed is they spend 2, 3, 4 years into a long distance relationship, only finding out that one or both people aren't going to make that shift. So it's another issue to consider.
I call those people geographically undesirable.
Exactly.
I think it's important for us to recognize what the reality of that is, because the romance is, oh, isn't this lovely? But I want to talk about this point for a minute before you give us number 4, or 3 and 4. Because the idea of romance, like, oh, somebody cares about me, somebody loves me, there's chemistry, there's excitement, but they're 1,000 miles away or on the other side of the globe. There is something that goes on. There's such safety because you get the excitement of being together occasionally, but the safety of knowing you have someone to use terms of endearment on, and that you have someone and you don't have to look. That compartment's filled. But then you have this romantic idea that one day love will conquer all. And we will not be in a difficult situation deciding who goes to whose geographical location and totally changes their lives.
Yeah. So, the reality is teamwork and partnership is one of the most important fundamentals of a successful relationship. And so it's difficult to build teamwork and partnership when there are 30 miles apart, let alone 100 to 500 to thousands of miles apart. True relationships are built through the struggles and not the bubble. And what most long distance relationships are, this beautiful bubble. You get together, you have great sex together, you go out drinking, have a good time, and you're back in your respective worlds. And then you're dealing with real world crises. Like right now, we're dealing with a health crisis that's global, right? And so is your partner there to help you go buy the toilet paper? Is your partner there to go support you if you're feeling sick? Kind of hard to do when you have long distance. So long distance are great for the bubble, but the real test of a relationship is through the hardening of the steel, and that's the fire. And it's hard to have fire when you're thousands of miles apart. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean romantic fire. I'm talking about the stress of a relationship fire.
Right. Okay, so let's go to 3 and 4.
Well, so number 1 was chemistry. Number 2, shared values. Number 3, blendable lifestyles. And number 4, bump, 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 is emotional maturity.
Yeah.
Now, I want to differentiate between maturity and emotional maturity. Maturity says, I will pay my bills on time. I will get to work on time. If I say I'm going to pick you up on a date at 6 o'clock, I show up at 5:59. That's what the mature person does. Emotional maturity is a little bit different. Emotional maturity is, do my actions match my words? Do I take personal responsibility for my choices? Do I act like a victim or do I act like a victor? Am I able to have an argument and fight fair? In other words, am I willing to listen to the other person and do I have good conflict resolution skills? Those are the elements of emotional maturity. And sadly, this is where the propensity of most relationship problems occur. And while a lot of women think it's the men who are emotionally immature, I can tell you as a man, women are equally as emotionally immature as men. It's not about availability, it's about emotional maturity. And so so when you're vetting for a person, it's really important to know their emotional maturity. And so part of the ways to vet for that is to get a sense of what kind of personal development work have they done on themselves? What kind of introspective work? Have they seen a therapist? Have they done have they read personal development books? Have they done introspective work? Have they healed childhood wounds? Have they gone to the Hoffman process or Insight or a number of these places? That gives you insight into whether or not a person has begun an emotional healing in their life.
And very, very important, because when those levels of emotional growth are very dissimilar,
Yeah.
then what happens is, in my terminology, is
Yeah.
that you get a parental relationship rather than a partner relationship. And that is
Yeah.
not going to help, because there's resentment built in. And that's never going to help. And I want to add to your idea about emotional maturity, because there's not going to be emotional intimacy without emotional maturity.
Yeah.
And because you're not safe. I talk about all the time the 3 hallmarks of a healthy relationship, any relationship, no matter romantic or otherwise. And I believe those to be equality and equity, reciprocity and
Yeah.
mutuality.
Yeah.
And if they're not there, then there is no demonstration of emotional maturity. So there will not be equity, reciprocity, and mutuality in the emotional intimacy. We'll
Yeah.
get an unbalanced relationship.
You said something a moment ago, and I want to just make a little tongue-in-cheek joke, but you said when there's an imbalance, in other words, one person's maturity level here is and the other person's here. Do you know what that gap in between is called?
I don't know what you call it.
I call it drama. When there's drama, it's usually because there's a big gap. Well, actually, the gap is more like this. It's not up or down. It's like this.
Well, there could be drama, but there will be disappointment.
Yeah.
And there may be resentment. I mean, certainly we all have had the experience where we're feeling down or we're feeling really serious, and our partner wants to play and wants to
Yeah.
lighten the mood and wants to skip down the street, and we're like, oh, we're not talking about that kind of emotional maturity.
No.
We're talking about the things that Jonathon mentioned earlier, which is being able to solve conflicts and have tough conversations and be vulnerable and raw and safe with each other. Those are
Yeah.
things that involve that. But those are the things that lead to emotional intimacy. And that's what we're longing for, even if we don't realize it. Yes, the other things are there, blendable lifestyles and chemistry and shared values, and they can be there. But if the package does not have this ability, this final piece, this emotional maturity that will lead to dependable emotional intimacy. When I wrote Kaizen for Couples, I talk about 5 relational gifts, Jonathon. And if we don't have these to give, and if our partner doesn't have them to give to us, and vice versa, it won't work. And that's honesty, safety, trust, respect, and reliability. And Save Your Sanity podcast is all about help for toxic relationships. And when we're dating, red flags show up. But when we're in that mode that you were talking about earlier, we want to just, leave on our rose-colored glasses.
Yeah.
And, here we just have this. We're dating, and this is going off like crazy.
Yeah.
And oh no, that couldn't be. Oh no, it's just a bad day. Oh, they're going through a little stress. And so you keep excusing this. And by the time that you're not liking it, you feel like you should have brought it up earlier. And there's a problem. And of course, anybody who is a toxic person, of course, we're talking about everybody today, but I'm talking particularly about the toxic ones. They're on best behavior to make themselves look like the person you always wanted and never thought you'd find, because they're in the gotcha mode. They want to find you. They want to nail you down as fast as possible. So if you're dating and somebody says, oh, I just know I'm going to marry you. You're the person I've been looking for my whole life. And you've been talking for about 12 and a half seconds. Know that that is a huge red flag, because it's the beginning of the gotcha process. I'm going to either move in with you, put our finances together, get you pregnant, or want to marry you. And that is a bad, bad thing to do quickly.
Well, men have a propensity to what I call try it on for size. So, and I'm very guilty of what you just shared. I've had dates where the limerence, the lust, has been so palpable, so powerful that I've said all those words. And yes, it is red flags. And red flags simply mean ask more questions. Now, my mother used to tell me, she goes, I looked at men and I always took them for a grain of salt. Whatever they said, I undercut it by 50%. In other words, yeah, sure, you want to marry me, but I'm going to cut that in half, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Men have a propensity for coming on strong that way, especially when testosterone is running through our veins, especially when dopamine is running through our veins. And so I know I've done it, and we do what I call try it on for size. My friend Allison Armstrong calls it cut and paste. In other words,
Right.
we will say, I want to see what it's like you in my life. So I'm going to see what it looks like being married to you. And we talk out loud. Okay. That's what, so when we try it on for size, we're actually saying it out loud. Doesn't mean we mean it. So my invitation is red flag. First off, this is my perspective. There's the difference between a deal breaker and a red flag. A deal breaker is an absolute no. For example, I don't want to date a smoker. That's a deal breaker. Okay. Someone who says to me, I love you on a second date, that might just be a red flag. Okay. So red flag means ask more questions, be more curious, be more inquisitive, allow you don't take it on face value until time has been developed in the relationship. A lot of people, Chris Rock says it this way. Most of us in the dating process show up as the ambassador of our best selves.
And that's true.
That both men and women alike. This is not singular to men. This is men and
Absolutely.
women alike. We want to put on a good show because every human being wants to be loved and liked. Our core wound is, am I lovable? Am I likable?
Yes.
Will you like me? So we try really hard. This is why, if you want to get a sense of someone's emotional maturity, pay attention. Do their actions match their words? Do they talk in victim consciousness? Now, that's so easy to spot. All you have to ask someone is, tell me about your ex-spouse. If they start going down the rabbit hole, is my ex-spouse, I'm the victim, whether it's a man or woman, I've been the victim of it. That's a person that doesn't take personal responsibility for those choices, and there's a chance that they may not be that emotionally mature.
Yeah, there's a very good chance that you're right about that.
Yeah.
Well, we have had so many things to talk about, and I knew that we would, of course, run out of time yet again and want to talk about other things. But I just want everybody to know where to find you. They can find you at jonathanaslay.com. Notice how you spell Jonathan.
Yeah.
An O, an A, and an O, which is not the usual way that you might be used to that. And know also, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can find me at transformingrelationship.com. Lots of things at both those websites for you. And whichever one, and both, go and have a look. But what you're being brought forth today is from a bonus episode of Save Your Sanity podcast. So come on over to Save Your Sanity podcast. There's over 100 podcast episodes there for you. And you'll also see when you get there how to access the Emotional Savvy 100 podcasts. So lots of good information for you. Thanks so much for being my guest, Jonathan.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so much fun. I want to give you a big, gigantic Jonathan Bear hug.
Well, maybe one day that'll happen. We don't live that far
apart. Yeah, we don't live that far apart, San Diego and LA. So hope that can happen, Rhoberta.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for being with us. If you enjoyed this, make sure that you tune in to Save Your Sanity podcast. Subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. Come on over to transformingrelationship.com. And for sure, go to jonathanaslay.com, where he has a gift for you. You will see it right away on his homepage, so don't miss that. Take very good care, everybody. And you know why? Because you matter.